Hello, and welcome to Historical Humans Reads, where we take primary sources and bring them to your screen. I'm Colum Coleman, and today we are reading from A Journey to Other Worlds, a Romance of the Future. Published in 1894 by John Jacob Aster IV, who famously died during the sinking of the Titanic, A Journey to Other Worlds is an early work of science fiction that follows the human race as they, having perfected Earth under a semi-benevolent corporate technocracy, set out to explore and colonize the rest of the solar system in the year 2000. Today we'll be reading from Chapter 1, Jupiter, of A Journey to Other Worlds. With that, let's begin. Jupiter, the magnificent planet, with a diameter of 86,500 miles, having 119 times the surface and 1,300 times the volume of the Earth, lay beneath them. They had often seen it in the terrestrial sky, emitting its strong, steady ray, and had thought of that faraway planet, about which till recently so little had been known, and a burning desire had possessed them to go to it and explore its mysteries. Now, thanks to apergy, the force whose existence the ancients suspected, but of which they knew so little, all things were possible. Arielt manipulated the silk-covered glass handles, and the Callisto moved on slowly in comparison with its recent speed, and all remained glued to their telescopes as they peered through the rushing clouds, now forming and now dissolving before their eyes. What transports of delight, what ecstatic bliss was theirs. Men had discovered and mastered the secret of apergy, and now, little lower than the angels, they could soar through space, leaving even planets and comets behind. Is it not strange, said Dr. Cortlandt, that though it has been known for over a century that bodies charged with unlike electricities attract one another, and those charged with like repel, no one thought of utilizing the component of gravitation? In the 19th century, savants and Indian jugglers performed experiments with their disciples and masses of inert matter, by causing them to remain without visible support at some distance from the ground. And while many of these, of course, were quacks, some were on the right track, though they did not push their research. President Beerwarden and Arielt assented. They were steering for an apparently hard part of the planet's surface, about 1.5 degrees north of its equator. Since Jupiter's axis is almost at right angles to the plane of its orbit, said the doctor, being inclined only about 1.5 degrees instead of 23.5, as was the Earth's till nearly so recently, it will be possible for us to have any climate we wish, from constantly warm at the equator to constantly cool or cold as we approach the poles, without being troubled by extremes of winter and of summer. Until the Callisto entered the planet's atmosphere, its 5 moons appeared like silver shields against the black sky. But now things were looking more terrestrial, and they began to feel at home. Beerwarden put down his notebook, and Arielt returned a photograph to his pocket, while all three gazed at their new abode. Beneath them was a vast continent, variegated by chains of lakes and rivers stretching away in all directions except toward the equator, where lay a placid ocean as far as their telescopes could pierce. To the eastward were towering and massive mountains, and along the southern border of the continent, smoking volcanoes. While towards the west they saw forests, gently rolling plains, and tablelands that would have satisfied a poet or set an agriculturist's heart at rest. How I should like to mine those hills for copper, or drain the swamps to the south, exclaimed Colonel Beerwarden. The lake's superior mines and the reclamation of the Florida Everglades would be nothing to this. Any inhabitants we may find here have so much land at their disposal they will not need to drain swamps on account of pressure of population for some time, put in the doctor. I hope we may find some four-legged inhabitants, said Ariel, thinking of their explosive magazine rifles. If Jupiter is passing through its Jurassic or Mesozoic period, there must be any amount of some kind of game. Just then a quiver shook the Callisto, and glancing to the right, they noticed one of the volcanoes in violent eruption. Smoke filled the air in clouds. Hot stones, then floods of lava poured from the crater. Even the walls of the hermetically sealed Callisto could not arrest the thunderous crashes that made the interior of the car resound. Had we not better move on? Said Beardwarden. And accordingly they went toward the woods they had first seen. Finding a firm strip of land between the forest and an arm of the sea, they gently grounded the Callisto, and, not being altogether sure how the atmosphere of their new abode would suit terrestrial lungs, or what its pressure to the square inch might be, they cautiously opened the porthole a crack, retaining their hold upon it with its screw. Instantly there was a rush and a whistling sound as of escaping steam. In a few moments the barometer stood at 36 inches, whereupon they closed the opening. I fancy, said Dr. Courtliant, that we had better wait now till we become accustomed to this pressure. I do not believe it will go much higher, for the window made but little resistance when we shut it. Finding they were not inconvenienced by a pressure but little greater than that of a deep coal mine, they again opened the port, whereupon the barometer showed a further rise to 42, and then remained stationary. Finding also that the chemical composition of the air suited them, and that they had no difficulty in breathing, the pressure being the same as that sustained by a diver in 14 feet of water, they opened the door and emerged. They knew fairly well what to expect, and were not disturbed by their new conditions. Though they had apparently gained a good deal of weight as a result of their ethereal journey, this did not incommode them. For though Jupiter's volume is 1,300 times that of the Earth, on account of its lesser specific gravity, it has but 300 times the mass. As in, it would weigh but 300 times as much. Further, although a cubic foot of water or anything else weighs 2.5 as much as on Earth, objects near the equator, on account of Jupiter's rapid rotation, weigh 1/5 less than they do at the poles, by reason of the centrifugal force. Influenced by this fact, and also because they were 483 million miles from the sun instead of 92 million as on Earth, they had steered for the northern limit of Jupiter's tropics, and in addition to this, they could easily apply the apergetic powder in any degree to themselves when beyond the limits of the Callisto, and be so attracted by any extent from twice the pull they receive from the gravitation on Earth to almost nothing. Bearwarden and Ariel shouldered their rifles, while Dr. Courtliant took a repeating shotgun with number 4 shot, and, having also some hunting knives and a sextant, all three set out in a northwesterly direction. The ground was rather soft, and a warm vapor seemed to rise from it. To the east, the sky was veiled by dense clouds of smoke from the towering volcanoes, while on their left, the forest seemed to extend without limit. Clumps of huge ferns were scattered about, and the ground was covered with curious tracks. Jupiter is evidently passing through a Carboniferous or a Devonian period such as existed on Earth, though, if consistent with its size, it should be on a vastly larger scale, said the doctor. I never believed in the theory, he continued, that the larger the planet, the smaller should be its inhabitants, and always considered it a makeshift, put forth in the absence of definite knowledge, the idea being apparently that the weight of very large creatures would be too great for their strength. Of the fact that mastodons, and creatures far larger than any now living on Earth existed here, we have absolute proof, though gravitation must have been practically the same then as now. Just here they came upon a number of huge bones, evidently the remains of some saurian, and many times the size of a grown crocodile. On passing a growth of most luxuriant vegetation, they saw a half-dozen sack-like objects, and drawing nearer, noticed that the tops began to swell, and at the same time became lighter in color. Just as the doctor was about to investigate one of them with his duck shot, the enormously inflated tops of the creatures collapsed with a loud report, and the entire group soared away. When about to alight 40 yards off, they descended membranous folds in the manner of wings, which checked their descent, and on touching the ground, remained where they were without rebound. We expect to find all kinds of reptiles and birds, exclaimed the doctor, but I do not know how we should class those creatures. They seem to have pneumatic feet and legs, for their motion was certainly not produced like that of frogs. When the party came up with them, the heads again began to swell. I will perforate the air chamber of one, said Colonel Burwarden, withdrawing the explosive cartridge from the barrel of his rifle and substituting one with a solid ball. This will doubtless disable one so that we can examine it. Just as they were about to rise, he shot the largest through the neck. All but the wounded one soared off, while Beardwarden, Arielt, and Cortland approached to examine it more closely. You see, Cortland, said, this vertebrate, for that is definitely as we can yet describe it, forces a great pressure of air into its head and neck, which, by the action of valves, it must allow to rush into its very rudimentary lower extremities, distending them with such violence that the body is shot upward and forward. You may have noticed the tightly inflated portion underneath as they left the ground. While speaking, he had moved rather near, when suddenly a partially concealed mouth opened, showing the unmistakable tongue and fangs of a serpent. It emitted a hissing sound, and the small eyes gleamed maliciously. Do you believe it is a poisonous species? Asked Arielt. I suspect it is, said the doctor, for though it is doubtless able to leap with great accuracy upon its prey, we saw it took some time to recharge the upper air chamber, so that, were it not armed with poison glands, it would fall an easy victim to its more powerful and swifter contemporaries, and would soon become extinct. This has been an excerpt from A Journey to Other Worlds on Historical Humans Reads. If you enjoyed this video and like to hear more excerpts from original texts, please like to be notified of the next one. If there's a work you would like to hear, be sure to like the video and leave a comment listing it below. Thank you for listening.